Good evening and welcome to another show of Conservative Corner. We are a monthly show, TV show, out of the wonderful studios here at New TV. And we thank New TV for hosting us and for allowing us to use their studios month after month. And we've been doing this for a very long time. And our perspective is generally we choose the road, shall we say, that's a bit unconventional in the very liberal community of Newton and Massachusetts, and at this point the United States in general. So we are, for want of a better phrase, the loyal opposition. We are Republicans, and we view things and talk about things from a Republican perspective, a perspective that you may not often hear in the confines of Newton City Hall, and as of now in the confines of the State House as well. We talk about issues that pertain to the community, but also the state, and sometimes on a national level. What we are going to do tonight is more or less from a commemorative historical perspective. And this is coming again from Republican activists. And we are going to highlight and elaborate on and commemorate the legacy of and the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, who was assassinated 60 years ago this Wednesday, November 22nd. And that assassination was a traumatic event for the United States and for the world, and it really changed the course of history. So we decided that, given that John F. Kennedy was our president as well, he was the president of all Americans, and it affected all Americans. And even those of us who may not remember it because we were too young, many of you who are, I would say, above the age of 65 will remember where you were the day that it happened. And I think it's proper and fitting that we talk about it and try to come up with some shall we say, definitive answers if we can, or at least an interesting perspective. And I have with us here tonight my dear friend and community activist, long-term community activist, Ginny Gardner, who is also the host of Virginia's Vibes and Views. And she also hosts a monthly program on New TV and has been doing it for quite a while. And I asked her to come on because, for several reasons, and foremost of which is that she's knowledgeable about the subject. And specifically, as opposed to myself, she remembers where she was and what she was doing the day that John Kennedy was assassinated. So, Ginny, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. I feel very honored to be here and talk about
well,
this.
This is a first, and I'm glad that you're here. So,
I won't take control.
If I may ask, no, that's fine. If I may ask, how old were you when Kennedy was assassinated?
I was 10 years old.
So I'm sure that you remember, where and when it happened.
I do remember.
Or how it happened. Where were you when it happened?
I was in school at Burr School across from Corpus Christi Church in Auburndale.
In Auburndale.
Yep, and we were sent home early. So.
Now, did the principal make an announcement over the loudspeaker?
I don't recall. I don't think she did. I just remember we were all dismissed from school early and went home. And then when, of course, then it wasn't the 24/7 news cycle. So the TV was on, which was unusual. And my older sister was crying. And then I think it was, I can see his face and I can't remember his name, of course, announced that the president had been shot.
Mm-hmm. And had been shot but not killed.
When we heard what he said, had been shot. And then I do remember him coming on saying that the president was killed. And I think even that young, I thought of the two young children, John, and we called him John, and Caroline Kennedy.
And at the time, I remember speaking to people who were at both Newton North and Newton South at the time, or rather the Newton High School at the time and Newton South, and especially in Newton South. The principal, whose name escapes me right now, in 1963, almost had a very, in a justifiable way, a very emotional response over the loudspeaker to the assassination of the president. And he told the students what had happened, and not how it happened, but what had happened. And didn't elaborate further. And I'm not sure if they dismissed school at that time. But the word spread quickly, and it was estimated that within a few hours, 98% of the American public knew that the president had been killed, because really from the time that he was shot until the time that he was declared dead
Right.
was a very short window. And it was about an hour that occurred from the time that
Right.
it was finally announced, mostly by Walter Cronkite, who was really seen
Right.
as the voice of America at that time. And so it happened so quickly that the media and the public didn't have time to absorb what was happening. And then, of course, the days after that were very traumatic indeed, because the country was in shock. And that night, it was estimated that well over 2/3 of Americans had trouble sleeping because of what happened at that day. Now, in particular, John Kennedy was near and dear to Commonwealth of Massachusetts, to the Boston area, because he was from here. And when I say here, I mean here. He was from Brookline, and his family had roots here, going back to the 19th century. His grandfather, Honey Fitzgerald, was the mayor of Boston. His father was a high-ranking official under the Roosevelt administration and ambassador to Great Britain in World War II. And then, of course, John Kennedy became the congressman from the district, not here in Newton, but just outside of Newton, which is in Cambridge and beyond.
Right.
When those districts were more compacted, we had a lot more congressmen back then.
Yeah.
Then he became president. He became senator in 1952, and then he took the chance and ran for president in 1960 and won against Richard Nixon. But the assassination has really intrigued people for many decades and immediately afterwards, and right from the time of the Warren Commission, which had hoped to dispel whatever misgivings or that people had that the assassination was a part of a wider conspiracy. And then it continued on from there with I believe it was the House Special Committee investigating the assassination in the mid-'70s. And so there's been much speculation about how he was killed and who killed him and whether it was a part of a wider plot. All the documents pertaining to the Kennedy assassination were supposed to have been released 50 years after his assassination,
right.
which would have been in 2003. And that would have been under the presidency of George W. Bush. Since then, we've had George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and now we're on Joe Biden. So none of them have released those documents.
Correct.
And for the life of me, I can't figure out why, among those four presidents, they haven't done it. Three presidents, four. They haven't done it. And it only fuels speculation that it was a part of a grand conspiracy. And I had hoped that Donald Trump, being a so-called maverick, doing things that other presidents or other people tended not to do, that he would have done it. But he didn't do it. And if he had, maybe it would put the issue to rest. But you have one perspective, and I have a different perspective on the assassination. So please tell me what you think, how it happened, and who did it, and if you could.
Okay. Well, first of all, I had a guest on my show, and he did a series for me when I first started at New TV, and his name was Charles Vergadas, and he probably had thousands of books on this subject. He read everything connected with the assassination. He was active in Boston politics for a little bit through his life, and he would tell me all the players, and it was, like I said, it was a 4-part series. And I think I believed when I was younger that it was Lee Harvey Oswald. They certainly set it up to look like that. And then, of course, Jack Ruby killed him 3 days later. We all saw that on TV. And the strange thing is, I think as I got older, we all questioned it, and they wouldn't say anything. Like you say, the Warren Commission was never forthright. We got tiny bits of information. It was supposed to be released 50 years. No one's released it. And they must have been privy to it. Is it something that happened? Is it what they call the deep state? Was it the CIA? I mean, the accusations were that we started hearing mafia, CIA, deep state, whatever, this underground government. And of course, they haven't denied anything. And that was some of the focus. Some of the focus was how he was shot and where the sounds and the way that he was shot how his head moved, the closeness, and who else was shot in the car, what Mrs. Kennedy did immediately following. That didn't make sense. And then, although Lee Harvey Oswald probably could have done it because he was a marksman, he could have done the bolt action rifle with accuracy. He was trained that way.
But, you know, Ginny, one of the things that people have to realize, and it's been elaborated on, that where the Kennedy limousine, it was open, the top was off, and it was driving at 11 miles per hour through a road in Dealey Plaza in Dallas.
They were rerouted.
Rerouted.
They were rerouted. They were supposed to take another route, and right before they changed the route, the route. Yes.
So,
yeah.
but he was. Now picture this scenario, and we've all seen the Zapruder film.
Oh,
The
yeah.
Zapruder film was really an extraordinary film, probably the most extraordinary in history, and it was simply taken by this man who was a storekeeper, and he nearby, and he got this very new state-of-the-art movie camera from his kids for his birthday, and somehow, some way, he was able to take the entire video, the entire pictures of the Kennedy motorcade going down, and despite the shots being fired, he held his hand steady.
Wow.
He held his hand steady, and he was able to get the entire assassination on film. Yeah. And when the FBI found out about it, they were shocked. They were shocked at the extraordinary luck that they had this film. And of course, it was published in Life magazine with the stills, and they were able to decipher a lot from that. But one of the things that people have to realize is there's a difference between what I call probability and possibility. Now, is it probable that that an assassin could be at the top of a building, close to 100 yards away, and with an old bolt rifle, take 3 shots and have 2 of them hit the head of a moving target, the President of the United States, and kill him? Is it probable? No, it's not probable. Is it possible?
Sure.
It is possible.
Sure.
And the reason why it's possible is because you and I, and anyone in this building where we are now, could not have taken those shots and succeeded.
Right.
But one of the few things that Lee Harvey Oswald did was good at in his, shall we say, limited and, for want of a better term, pathetic life, is that he was an expert marksman. And as much as I don't want to tie him to the Marines, he was a Marine.
Yep.
And when they had target practice, he could hit 49 out of 50 targets on the range at 200 yards. And that's extraordinary. So he was the sharpshooter in his platoon, in his company, and he was able to make such a shot. Now, picture this, you're Lee Harvey Oswald, you're crazy, and you're a communist, and he was a communist.
He was a communist.
And he was very vindictive, and he was a miserable, unhappy person. He lived in the Soviet Union for a time. He tried to go to Cuba. Well, the Soviets didn't want him. They basically kicked him out because they thought he was unstable. He went to Cuba, or he at least tried to get into Cuba with to join their revolution. And the FBI had him on their watch list. Well, they didn't watch him enough because he had access to guns. And by having access to guns, he had the potential for something very violent and crazy. Now, you're Lee Harvey Oswald, and you're sitting in your waiting room, shall we say, your break room at the Texas Depository building where he worked. He manufactured or did something pertaining to books. And then suddenly you look at the newspapers, and at the time the newspapers detailed, John F. Kennedy, the president, is coming to Dallas this week, and this day, and this is the route that he's taking. And chances are he's going to come right by your window. And at the time, the Secret Service, I'm not saying they were lax, but they weren't as thorough as they are now.
Right.
So there's Lee Harvey Oswald. And he has a rifle at home. And then he's picked up from home by a coworker. And it's in a long bag. And the coworker asks him, "What's that?" And he says, "Curtain rods." Coworker doesn't ask him further questions. Then Oswald goes to the window at the top, near the top of the building. And the roadway from where President Kennedy is supposed to come down is 88 and a half yards away. That's less than a football field. And Oswald has this rifle with a periscope.
That's right.
or not a periscope.
Telescope.
Telescope, yeah. And so Oswald, being a marksman, a sharpshooter in the U.S. military, knows how to shoot moving targets. That's what he was
exactly.
trained for.
Yeah.
So the motorcade comes down, and Oswald has this old rifle. It's an old Italian bolt rifle from, I
Right.
believe, 1906. Now, in order to
Right.
shoot Kennedy, bear with me if you would. He's aiming for the target. He takes one shot, boom, boom, boom. Second shot, boom. Third shot, boom. And out of those 3 shots, he's able to hit the president twice. Now, the first shot hit the president in the neck.
Yeah.
And then you can see his wife, Jackie, reaching up to him. The second shot, we're not sure if that missed, but the third shot, one of the 2 shots hit him in the head. And the third shot is the most horrific because the third shot is what killed him. The second shot, he probably could have survived. And then, of course, according to the Zapruder film, he zooms away, and then it goes in the tunnel. So is it possible that he could have done it? Yes, it's very possible. Now, the question remains is, who was Oswald? Was he working alone, or did people
Right.
put him up to it? Now, and it's especially revealing in that, given his background, where he lived in the Soviet Union and his communist leanings, and not just his leanings, but his communist activism. But you know, it's interesting that right when Kennedy was shot, and it was revealed that it was Oswald, the Soviets, KGB, had a file on him because he lived in the Soviet Union in Minsk.
Yeah.
And the ambassador supposedly immediately contacted the FBI and said, we did not do it, even before the FBI accused them. We did not do it.
Right.
We have a whole file on Oswald. We didn't do it. We'll give it to you. We promise we didn't do it, because they were so paranoid that logically they would be the first target. And they were probably nervous about Lyndon Johnson pressing a few buttons and dropping nuclear bombs on Moscow, which is not beyond the realm of from their own reaction.
Right.
And they were so they were adamant that they didn't do it. And the Cubans likewise denied responsibility for it. But the Kennedys had a lot of enemies. They certainly
sure
had
did,
those
yes.
two. The Soviets would never have done it. The Cubans maybe because of the fact that
Cuban
Kennedy
Missile
and the
Crisis.
CIA
Yeah.
tried to assassinate Fidel Castro.
Yeah.
Then, of course, you had the mafia, you had the deep state, which a former police officer friend of ours is convinced that that's who killed Kennedy. So you have all these moving parts around there. But I think that it really gets down to the lack of the American public, or just the so-called experts, accepting the fact that you had this loner, this person who was a nobody, being able to assassinate the most powerful person in the world and one of the most, and certainly one of the most popular presidents in history.
Yeah.
But he did it. Lee Harvey Oswald did it. And so far, there has not been any definitive proof that there was a part of a wider conspiracy, because again, we're now 60 years out from that. So you would think that people would come forward with proof, and I mean proof, that this occurred. And there hasn't been any proof, aside from Oliver Stone's fictitious movie JFK, and which got an Academy Award. God knows why it did. So I'm a believer in the theory, based on the Warren Commission, that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone gunman, and there was no one else to tie him to it. And of course, that's made complicated too by the fact that he himself was killed just a few days later by Jack
I was
Ruby.
going to say, the gun, by the way, is a Carcano. It's called Carcano M38. And it was, I think it was used, they used it briefly in World War II. And it's a bolt action. But he was a marksman.
Yeah.
And for a bolt action, you have to, it's not like the automatic. You have to put the gun down, you shoot.
It was on a box.
Yeah, you shoot, and then, well, if it was just on the box, he leaned on it. But it doesn't matter. He still has to pull it back.
That's right.
Bolt action to bring up the next, bullet. That takes time, and then he would have had to do it 3 times. I'm not convinced he didn't. I'm not convinced he did. Couple of things. It's been 60 years. They have not opened the file, so they leave us out here with theories. What kind of bothers me too is with Ruby, Jack Ruby, killed him 3 days later. There's been an association with Ruby that goes back to the underworld, but he was also pre this assassination. They were meeting. They were Ted Cruz's father was linked to some Cuban thing. As a matter of fact, there were lots of people. You could point the finger anywhere, and they all, either one of them could have done it. Mafia, of course. Deep state, yes. Why did Ruby kill him? For what? Because he came, for what reason? He came in to take law into his own hands, or was he afraid he was going to talk?
There's the issue of the dog with Ruby. And what do I mean by that? Ruby had this collie dog that he loved dearly, and he left him in his car with the window open. And he went into the police station. So when you love your pet dearly and you leave him in the car for a bit, that means you're coming back. So Ruby went in there, and it was just by chance. They're bringing down Oswald. The cameras are on him. Ruby's there. Ruby's armed. People carry guns in Texas.
Right.
Ruby sees him. An emotional response, bang, bang, bang. So that's the thing. That's the dog theory. Because Ruby, Ruby would not have gone in there with the intent to kill Oswald with his dog in the car. I know that it sounds a bit trivial.
I think that's
but
true
that
because
matters to
that
people.
it could, but.
And of course, Ruby died shortly thereafter.
He died. I think there are a lot of moving parts with this, and there's any one of them could be blamed. The CIA deep state was mad at JFK for not invading Cuba during the missile crisis. They had trained, waiting for the green light, and they were cut. It didn't go over well with the military-industrial complex people who wanted us to go in there. Jack Kennedy was about to stop Vietnam. He was going to go out.
And I'm glad that you talked about you mentioned that because, you know, one of it's a given that Kennedy's assassination changed the course of history. It was tragic for a lot of reasons. Because in October of 1963, one of Kennedy's advisors handed him a report that said, over the past few months, 70 American military advisors were killed in Vietnam. And he was mortified by that. He was horrified by that. He didn't understand if they're advisors, why are they being killed? And he was so upset at that, he planned to pull them out. And he planned to de-escalate Vietnam as much as possible. So if you consider the fact that had Kennedy lived, or rather, after Kennedy was killed, what did Lyndon Johnson do? He escalated and created
made a lot of money.
The Vietnam War, and that too. But
his friends made a lot of money.
But the point is that, you know, the premise is that Kennedy would have withdrawn from Vietnam, would have stopped the Vietnam War before it began, in which case we wouldn't have had 52,000 American soldiers killed in Vietnam. So there was that tragedy that could have been averted had he lived. And then of course, the space race was continuing anyway, despite the fact that he was killed. So that was his legacy that began with him and moved on. And then also we have to wonder, would the riots of the 60s continued anyway? Probably, because it was a generational thing. But the other thing is, Ginny, what I think is really evident is that if you look at a time, you grew up in the 60s and 70s like I did, but if you look at the time that everything went wrong, everything was going right for America until the Kennedy assassination. After that, everything went wrong. You had the war in Vietnam, the race riots, the riots in general throughout America, really almost a disillusion of the country by 1968. And then you had his brother, Robert, who was killed also. And then we got on to Nixon, who basically almost destroyed the presidency. And then you had the mediocre presidencies of Ford and Carter with economic disillusion in America. And then, so everything went wrong for the next 17 years, and then until Ronald Reagan in 1981. And then things started to turn around with that.
I think that day, it's very similar to how we felt 9/11. We were shaken. Our little world, perfect world, excuse me, was very shaken, and it changed overnight. The thing that I also think with this, April of 1968, 5 years later, Martin Luther King was assassinated. Not 2 months later, Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated. He was going after he was still going after the
mafia.
mafia. And then the race thing. I don't know if Kennedy had survived, if we would have lived through that the race riots and things. They were solving that. I think that money was made in Vietnam. He was going to stop Vietnam. A lot of people made a lot of money with that. And would it have been a different world? Maybe. Maybe. We lived in what they called Camelot then,
Yes.
which was so silly because now we know the truth, too, about Camelot.
Of course.
But that was a mindset of the country, and it was flipped overnight. Flipped.
It really was. And like I said, it's really, I think, representative of a loss of innocence for the United States.
Absolutely.
And just to have a president, a young, attractive, dynamic president, cut down in his prime. And after that, everything went wrong. And then when his brother, who could have restored the Kennedy presidency, the Kennedy legacy, in 1968, when he was struck
killed.
down as well, and he would have beaten Richard Nixon. He would have beaten him had he gotten the nomination. He would have beaten Richard Nixon for sure in 1968, and then we would have seen a different Kennedy presidency. And then, of course, that didn't happen. And, it so traumatized people. One of my dear friends in later life was a fellow named Richard Goodwin. And Richard Goodwin was a senior advisor to President John F. Kennedy in the White House. And he was from Brookline, as Kennedy was, born in Brookline. And so he wasn't in Dallas when Kennedy was shot, but he took care of the funeral arrangements when Kennedy returned, his body was returned to Washington. And then years later, he went to work on Robert Kennedy's campaign. He was a campaign manager, and he was physically with him when he was killed in Los Angeles at the Ambassador Hotel. And he was so traumatized and disillusioned by that he completely left politics, and then he went to live in a cabin in central Maine and without water, electricity, and he wrote memoirs. It was called Remembering America, an excellent book. And a lot of people at that time who were involved with the Kennedy campaign, Robert Kennedy, and really from his brother, were so traumatized by that they didn't get involved in politics again. They just withdrew from it
There was a
completely.
cloud, and there was also a fear. And the cloud was because of all the death and the violent death. But the fear hits me because who threatened them? What were they afraid of? I go back to my conspiracy theory. I firmly believe it was the deep state, the CIA. That's what I believe.
We'll only know that if they open the files.
Open the files.
30 minutes goes by very fast.
right.
I wish we had 2
I wish
hours
we
on
did
this
too.
topic because we need it.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, we would urge Americans to reflect on November 22nd and this month in general for the 60th anniversary of the death of John F. Kennedy. And you're hearing this from 2 Republican activists, that he was a very good president, and America lost a lot
Well loved.
with his assassination. And what the last question I want to ask you is: would he have been a Republican today, or would his politics have been Republican?
He never would have come out as a Republican, but yes, he had
He would have been
Republican
inclined.
values.
I concur with
agree.
that. Thank you so much for
Thank
this,
you,
Jenny.
Tom.
And happy Thanksgiving to all of
Happy
you.
Thanksgiving.